I was about to say good morning, but I guess it's now morning. Hi, this is Bruce McDonald, and welcome to Academics of PA. I'm here with my co-host, Josie Schafer.
Hi, everybody.
Do you want to introduce our guest for the day?
I thought you were doing it. Okay, sorry. Hi, everyone, and thank you, Dr. Rosemary O'Leary from the University of Kansas, being here with us today.
Hi, Josie. Hi, Bruce. Thanks for having me.
Oh, thanks for coming.
Absolutely. We are very excited to have you, and you have a long and illustrious career, and we want to dig into all of it. But I think one of the things that we really try to highlight in this podcast is how people come to the field of public administration. So can you tell us about that?
Sure. So I started out in law school, and sitting in my constitutional law class, I ended up next to a woman who was in the JD MPA program. And I asked her, what is MPA? I had never heard of it. So she told me about public administration. She said she wanted to be a bond attorney. She talked about city management, local government management. This was at the University of Kansas School of Law. And I said, wow, I want to do that. That's so cool. So I applied for and got into the JD MPA program at the University of Kansas. And from there ended up working in state government, and ended up after 4 years being the number 2 person in the state environmental agency. And I was 28 years old, had a staff of 50.
Oh, wow.
Wow. Yeah.
I can tell you when I teach organizations and management to MPA students, I use myself and those years as an example of what not to do. I made a lot of mistakes. We got clobbered by the public for decision-making that wasn't transparent and lack of involvement of the public in our processes. And based on that experience, I thought, if only I had a PhD in public administration, I would have all the answers.
Ha ha.
Exactly. So that's when I went to Syracuse University for the PhD program there. And it honestly took me 6 months to figure out that no one has all the answers. And we do the best we can. We gather the best information. We educate ourselves as best we can. But in the end, there's no perfect way to be a public manager. But that's how I got into it. And 6 months into the program at Syracuse, I was just so hooked and delighted by the research side of it that I ended up staying despite my disappointment that there was no one who had all the answers.
It's amazing. So I have 2 follow-ups that I have to ask. What do you think enabled you to rise so fast in state government? And then what made you willing to leave that?
Oh, good question. What made me rise so fast? I was in this cool program. It was called the State of Kansas Governor's Fellows Program. And the people who are accepted are rotated every 3 months into a new agency. So I think that experience gave me so much exposure. And because I ended up getting an offer from each of the 4 agencies I was in. And I recently reconnected with somebody else who was in that program. And we also talked about the fact that there was a lot of luck involved, honestly, in that she said, you got assigned to great agencies and great people, and not everybody did. So that's definitely part of it. And I'm so grateful for all of my mentors during those years who really kind of tried to bring the best out of me and helped me along the way.
And then why were you willing to leave state government?
At the time, after 2 years as director of policy and planning for the State Environmental Agency, I thought, oh my gosh, I don't really know what I'm doing. So I really honestly thought if I had a PhD, I would have all the answers. I would know exactly what I was doing. I even kept in touch with a lot of people in the state thinking maybe I would go back.
Okay.
Go back to administration. But I just got hooked on the research part of it and never looked back.
We love that. You've never really looked back. You don't miss it. You don't think about it.
I don't miss it. I honestly think that public administration is the highest calling. And I tell my students that all the time. And I have such great respect for people who do it well. I think I'm a better researcher than I was an administrator. And once you live through it, you know how hard it is. And you know what it's like to have many masters, many bosses, and try to motivate people who might not have had a raise for 5 or 6 years. And I just have so much respect for our public servants. And I think that just given whatever skill set I have, I'm a better teacher and researcher than I am a practitioner.
This is kind of a slight deviation from that, but it relates back. Since you have the practitioner experience, but then you've also been the director of the school at Kansas, is there any kind of relation of how the skills translate from one to the other?
Yes. Well, I have told my family, my husband and my daughter, many a time, I'm so glad I became director in my early 60s, because those decades in between being the 28-year-old leader, administrator, and now the 60s, in my 60s, leader, administrator, I have grown. I have way more acceptance and tolerance for different opinions and angry people and dialogue and debate. And I'm just such a better person, I think, just because of age, honestly, and my experiences that I've had throughout the last couple decades, including 13 years in other academic administration capacities. I definitely think I'm a better administrator today than I was 3-4 decades ago. And so there are connections. I mean, there's still many masters. There's still the bureaucracy to work through. There's still angry people. There's still dialogue and debate. And as you both know, with faculty, there's more dialogue and debate. And I've learned just to accept it and let it go and look at it as a positive thing. And my motto is there's always a way forward. There's always a way forward. And that's the mantra that I tell myself all the time. And so far, so good. It has worked. And I've really enjoyed my colleagues at the University of Kansas.
I feel like I had an idea I wanted to name the episode The Highest Calling, but now I want to switch to Always a Way Forward. Off topic. Anyway, so tell us about some of your early research and that research that you so connected with early on that made you want to do research forever.
Yeah. One thing I'll say about being at the Maxwell School of Syracuse University that I really enjoyed, because that program is embedded in what is essentially the School of Social Sciences. There are 13 pretty large departments there. I really learned to appreciate a diversity of disciplinary perspectives. And as PhD students, and then later, I was on the faculty there later, we had to present our research in front of people who weren't trained exactly like us. So I learned to appreciate, although I was initially fearful, of economists in the room who would ask a particular type of questions. And then I learned to appreciate the sociologists and the political scientists and the anthropologists. So I think that experience had a huge impact on my perspective on research, really, and that's what really invigorated me. I love looking at issues from many, many different perspectives. I think it's the best hope we have for really solving some of society's toughest public policy problems and issues. I was lucky to have David Rosenblum as a mentor who shared my interests. As I said earlier, I came in as a lawyer at JD-MPA. So David was very interested in the courts. And the very first semester I was there, he said in passing in a seminar, someone should look at the impact of courts on a particular organization or agency. I don't think anybody's done a longitudinal analysis looking at how courts torque policy and administration in a particular agency. And so right there, my first semester, there was my dissertation topic. So I pursued that. I looked at how the impact of courts affected the policy and administration of the EPA. So that was the first.
Still very timely research.
I think so. Yes, it's a classic. So that's really how I got my start, and wrote about courts and public administration probably for the first decade of my career. And one thing I have allowed myself to do is to kind of go with what I call the creative urge in research. And rather than look at it as drudgery and something we have to do, ask myself, what would be fun to do? Like, what are the big questions that I care about that will sustain me through a grueling research project? And so from there, I have moved to issues of collaboration and now collaborative leadership. And all of that really was, I would say, every single major research project I've done in the last 30 years has its roots in challenges I faced as a practitioner.
Wow. So of course, you are very prolific. You write all the time, and maybe you've started to get at what allows you to do as much work as you do and write as much as you do and publish as much as you do. But can you talk about a little bit about that process for you and why you're so good at it?
Well, thank you for saying that I'm good at it. I at my age now, I end up I end up being a mentor for a lot of people, and I love being a mentor. And I recently got phone calls from two women in our field who had made it really, but had made it as mid-career. One of them got an endowed chair, another one reached full professor, and they both said, "Now what do I do?" And what I said to them is, well, think of this again as a creative endeavor. And it's really a privilege that we have in our profession that a lot of other people don't have. That you could be creative. What would be fun? What are the compelling questions that you want to try to find answers to? And that approach really is what has sustained me. Not that I know I've had moments of burnout throughout the years, but then I am able to get back on the horse and keep writing because for me, it's always a reframing process. What are the compelling issues, and what can I do that would be creative?
Do you ever have a project that you just let go? Like, okay, this isn't interesting to me anymore. I don't want to follow this up. I don't want to push it to the conclusion and let it go. Or you say, no, there's still value there, and you go back and you finish it. And that could be just a problem that I have. How do you keep it fresh throughout the process?
I tend to be kind of a bulldog in that if I say I'm going to do something, I'm adamantly going to finish it. But I've learned in my old age to ask a lot of questions before I commit to a project. Somebody just called me yesterday and said, "Do you want to work on this project?" And I said, "I need to sleep on this. I don't want to make any sort of commitment that I can't fulfill 1,000%. And so the questions I'm asking myself right now are, is this the highest and best use of my time at this point in my career? That said, there have been threads of my research that I have dropped. I no longer write about courts and public administration. And part of that was just me thinking, I don't think I have anything else to contribute to this dialogue and discussion. Other people do, and I'm so greatly appreciative of the continuing work in that area, but I didn't think there was anything else that I could contribute. So I've moved on. That's when I moved on to collaboration and collaborative problem solving, collaborative governance, collaborative leadership. So I think it's okay to drop a thread or a theme in one's research. And I think the question is, what's the right time and place to do that?
Again, you have sort of transitioned in topics and themes throughout your career. would you say, does that interdisciplinary training help you to do that, to be able to use your skills in a different realm? Or is that your own, in your words, bulldog pursuit of new projects?
I think it's something that anyone can do. And the researchers I appreciate the most are, well, let me say this, the research experiences I appreciate the most are when there are many people in the room from many different perspectives talking about a similar issue. So, for example, the University of Arizona just had a very small conference. It was to mentor PhD students, and they invited 16 PhD students writing about collaborative governance and 16 senior scholars. And we were all paired up. And at the end, I had to give some final remarks, and I realized that we had people from about a half a dozen disciplines and areas in the room, from biophysical scientists to economists, sociologists, and a couple people trained in public administration. But it was such a rich discussion and dialogue. And at times, however, we had to stop and say, what are you talking about? How are you defining collaboration? How are you? And people would use terms that we, in public administration, we have pretty strict and different definitions for cooperation and collaboration. But the scientists were using them interchangeably.
Oh, no.
No, shocking.
Right.
So we'd have to say, wait a minute, here's the way we look at it. How are you looking at it? But by the end of the couple days, I had learned so much, and hopefully they learned from the PA scholars in the room. And I think the goal also was to further a theory that a couple people had proposed, and to kind of flesh it out and see if it was ready for others to look at. So I think anybody can do it. And I think more and more people today are inclined to be multidisciplinary and certainly use multiple methods in their research. And I think that's only a good thing.
So one of the audience we think for this podcast is rising scholars in public administration. And so maybe you can talk about the people or experiences that have helped you to develop this worldview and this ability to seek out different points of view and then use it to learn something or tackle something new. How do you build that network, those experiences to learn? It was not worded quite right, but I was almost there.
Yeah, no, it's great. I want to have a plenary panel at a conference someday with a bunch of senior scholars, and maybe this is something that could be a great spinoff from your project, with the title, What I Wish I Knew When I Was an Emerging Scholar. And we did this at NASPA. I put together something like this with deans. And I learned so much from those seasoned deans. I think it would be great to have some seasoned PA scholars talk about what they wish they had known or be as an emerging scholar. And the one thing that I wish I had known is the importance of being yourself. I sometimes get PhD students from different countries who will say to me, I've been told that it is in my best interest to do collaboration research. And I'll say, are you interested in collaboration research? Does this feel like a creative endeavor to you? Are there unanswered questions that you want to pursue? And usually the answer is no. But some advisor back home said, well, there's an emerging literature on collaboration, and this is an opportunity for you. So
I think I was told that, by the way. not collaboration specifically, but do this. This is a real career path. You have opportunity here. Sorry. Go ahead.
Along that line, I was told when I came up with my dissertation topic 3 decades ago you should not pursue this topic. And I said, why? And they said, because the dissertation is the time to strut your stuff and show people that you have really good quantitative skills. And I said, but I was taught to pick the method that most closely matches the research question. And this is basically what we would call mixed method, primarily qualitative and legal research topic. And I got into trouble. There were a couple people who wouldn't serve on my dissertation because of my methods. I had the last laugh. I ended up getting the NASPA dissertation award for that dissertation. But and that was the beginning of me realizing that you have to be true to yourself and call it as you see it, pick the topics and the sub areas that resonate with you, because that's your best shot at success.
One of the things I've noticed in a lot of schools and different places is that people take on the types of questions or the subject matter that based off of whoever they're working with. And so, you might be doing collaboration like you do. So if you have a student who is working with you for whatever reason, they do the exact same thing you do. And my response has always been to people who come along, I don't want to create a mini-me. I want to figure out how to help you get to where you want to go.
Exactly.
And everybody looks at me like I'm crazy every time I say that.
I think you're 100% right, Bruce.
Yeah, well, and so I think, it's amazing to be among like-minded individuals, but we are also facing an academy that clearly someone is perpetuating this sort of cloning idea, and I'm not sure how else to put it. What should we be doing, not me, but other people, to change the field, to make it a field where new ideas and creativity are celebrated rather than, not right now.
I do feel a need to say that it's okay to be a mini-me if that resonates with you. And there are some really, really good scholars in the field who took the research of their mentor and ran with it and continually express gratitude to that mentor for heading them in that direction. They've been very successful. Don Moynihan worked with Patricia Ingraham on performance management issues, and this launched this wonderful career that he's had, and he's taken it in his own direction. And you can definitely see the Don Moynihan part of the research, but he will say that Patricia Ingraham really launched him and was the catalyst that moved him in this direction. So I think it's okay to do that. I just always wanted to do my own thing. And I think part of it is modeling. We need to model respect and more than tolerance, appreciation for different ways of doing research, with the bottom line being it has to be rigorous. But as long as it's rigorous, there's room for different methods, different approaches, different questions, different theories, and come to it with sort of a questioning mind, asking what can I learn from this research that's so different from what I'm doing? So, for example, you both talked about budgeting. I am a closet budget person. I actually read those journals. I love them. For years, I was a member of ABFM, but nobody would ever consider me a budget researcher. But I have a deep appreciation for that work and the importance of that work. And I'd like to see more of it, an appreciation for people who do things a little differently than the way one does his or her research.
Well, I think what would be interesting is we could come up with a paper on the collaboration between governments and what it does for their fiscal health, and actually have you go to ABFM and present it. You'd have the room shocked as to you being there.
I've actually been to ABFM, and I really enjoy that conference. I really do. It's been a while. It's been over a decade since I've been there, but I think it's a really interesting conference.
We have a goal for next year. You'll be back.
There you go.
So one thing I was kind of curious in listening to you talk just then in terms of picking topics and doing the papers that are most interesting to you. It seems like there's kind of a little bit of a divide between people that have kind of the screw it attitude, I'm going to do me perspective, compared to those who fall in line with a very traditional academic perspective of here's what's expected of me, so I'm going to do A, B, and C along the way. And I've kind of started to notice that some of this distinction lies in people who have had practitioner careers or some type of career before they've become academic.
Mm.
I think part of the idea that you're going to do you is either because you have that experience and so you're drawing on it, or because, well, if it, the academic career doesn't work out, you can go do something else.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Oh, good question. I still remember a conversation I had with a mentor at the Maxwell School when I realized that I was surrounded by economists, and I do not think like an economist. I'm married to an economist now, but I don't do economics research. I don't think like an economist. And I said this to a mentor at Syracuse, and it was sort of like, woe is me, I don't belong here. And the person looked at me and said, well, what are you good at? And I said, well, I have a law background, so I can do legal analysis. I think I'm kind of good at organization theory. I went through 3 or 4 things that I felt pretty comfortable with. And he looked at me and he goes, so do that. And I've never forgotten that it's okay to do you, and still appreciate other people. I appreciate economic research so much. It's just not me. There's no way that I could add to it. So part of it might be a skill set that I cultivated as a practitioner. But I think even if I removed that from my background, I would still have something to offer from my educational background that would be different and would be okay. It's okay. It's okay to do what you're good at.
Now that I'm hearing you talk about this and the sort of enthusiasm you have for the work you do, it does come through. So I've read a lot of your work. I've had a lot of students read a lot of your work, and it's usually always a favorite. And I think of some of the pieces on the challenge, the Columbia Space Shuttle, and the ethics of dissent. Particular, like they're exciting pieces of work because they are revealing something new. They're interesting. And it also sort of puts you like in the middle of some scandals, right? Like some really exciting events in public administration history. Can you talk a little bit about some of your work that has been very related to the practitioner side of things?
Sure. Yeah. So the ethics of dissent, which is my book on guerrilla government. And there's a J-Part article and a PAR article and a couple other articles that came out of that research too. That has its foundation in my years as a practitioner. When I was 28 years old and managing this unit of 50 people and being number 2 in the agency. And I had a top-notch employee who would clock out at 5 o'clock and basically lobby against our organization and the secretary of the organization. And this was a real world problem that I had to deal with. And one of the first lines in the book is fire the bastard. And my boss called me in and said, fire the bastard, get rid of this guy right now. So that launched my interest in the idea of, well, how have other people handled this? Is this, certainly this couldn't have been the only time that this has happened. And so that's why that book is case-based, to sort of express that this can happen in many different settings. And really, I would say happens more than we think it does. The Columbia research has its roots with when I was on the return to flight task group for NASA after the Columbia Space Shuttle accident. And our task, as assigned by Sean O'Keefe, the administrator of NASA, was to hold the agency's feet to the fire. The first task force that came together right after the disaster said, here are 10 things, 10 problems, and here are 10 ways to address it. And so our group came in, and our purpose was to hold the agency's feet to the fire and help them make these changes. So that research, which was with Amy Donahue, basically looks at whether NASA is capable of changing. So again, writing what I know, writing what I experienced, having that kernel that starts it all, be from my experience with practitioners really has been invaluable. It keeps it real. And it also, again, sparks that creativity and that drive for answers to try to figure out what happened and how might practitioners deal with it in the future.
So cool. Any other sort of practitioner experiences, or even not necessarily that you researched, but that you've witnessed that you thought, wow, this is something the field needs to look at, the field needs to address. I wish I had more time to do it, or maybe you are working on it now. Places that you think we should be going based on what you're seeing happening in government.
One of the really mind-blowing experiences I had was growing my interest in collaboration, which again had the nugget started when I was a practitioner and we would get killed by the public for backroom decisions and just lack of transparency. And that made me think there's got to be a better way, and there has to be a literature out there. And then I looked at the literature. Some of it was really helpful, and some of it was lacking. So I dived into that as a researcher, but then I also wanted to be trained more in collaborative problem solving. So I actually went to Boulder, Colorado and got trained. It was just a 1 or 2 week session with a group called CDR and Associates. And these are people who mediate world issues like water rights on the Nile. And I got some training in collaborative problem solving with them. This was probably 20 years ago. And then I started to teach collaborative problem solving in the classroom. And at Maxwell, I had a regional employee from the EPA who devoured all of this. And he was like, yes, yes, yes. This is invaluable. This is the skill set. This is what I want to do. And he took what he learned and applied it in a regional dispute in Syracuse concerning wastewater treatment. And it was a huge disaster. I would love to say it was.
I'm not laughing at, I'm laughing at that happens.
Yes. Yes. And he followed the process to the T. Perfect. And he was a great student and a master of all the ideas. But what he couldn't control was the history of the problem and the animosity among or between the neighbors and the EPA. And there were racial and ethnic tensions involved. And in debriefing it with him, it was so humbling to understand how really complex the context is. And every context is different. And of course, we can't have a cookie cutter approach to just plop down into different contexts. We have to be so mindful of the different contexts and work within those. So I think that's an area with its roots in practice that needs a lot more research. And I think public administration researchers can develop a contingency theory. There's a couple people trying to come up with the different theories of collaborative governance, when it might work, under what conditions. I think that's just a huge field with so many unanswered questions, again, with its roots in practice.
So in my new position, I'm doing a lot more engagement and outreach work. And what is the best way, or what are the ways we need to be exploring to be better at integrating academic work into practice? Not just in specific cases, but is there something, not specific research or specific topics, but ways that we can be better participants in the practitioner side of things?
The Best Article Award for PAR this year went to Jill, I cannot remember her name, at Ohio State University. And the question that she looked at was not the typical collaboration question of who do we bring to the table, but which is where all the training starts. But her question was, who builds the table to begin with? And I think that is one way we can better work with practitioners is to, from day one, work with them in dialogue and discussion to build that table, to rather than say, okay, here's our toolkit that we can drop down in your situation. Ask them, what do you think you need and how would you approach it? And my guess is that probably a hybrid approach would be most effective in most situations.
Right. How could, being the convener or providing what they need versus providing what we have. I get that. Okay. Awesome. I'll use that in my own work. I appreciate it. You had a role in Minnowbrook 3. Is there anything about the Minnowbrook tradition that you think young academics of PA should know? Elements of it that that resonate today and you think should continue?
Well, I have a couple thoughts. One is, so Minnowbrook generally was started by Dwight Waldo in the 1960s in an era of huge stress in the United States, the Vietnam War. People who were in academia at that time talk about violence on campuses and burning of the student unions, tanks. There were tanks on the University of Wisconsin campus, for example. So, and when Waldo brought together those young scholars, and I think nobody was over the age of 30, these are my words, but I look at it as they wanted to kind of blow up the field. Like if we could blow up the field and reconceive what it's like and what we're doing, what would we do? And I think that's a common theme in Minnowbrook 2, and it was definitely a common theme in Minnowbrook 3, and there was recently one that was Minnowbrook at 50. And I think that kernel of like, let's be really critical about what we're doing and the importance of relevance, given that we're an applied field, is an important Minnowbrook lesson. But I'm saying this with a caveat because the Minnowbrook group each year was a very small group, and I don't think it can be looked at as representative of the field. And I have even heard people say that they were hurt or disappointed that they weren't invited to participate. And my advice to them would be, then, do your thing. Do your thing. If Minnowbrook doesn't resonate with you, go around it. Create your own ideas about changes in the field or whatever you think is important. And so I think that Minnowbrook is important, but I don't think it's something that everybody needs to sort of change their research because of.
Great point. I think Bruce.
Oh, absolutely. I'm just sitting here kind of taking this all in and trying to keep up in my own head.
I don't know if you know how awesome this has been, Dr. O'Leary, but this is a really, really good episode. I think you've tied together a lot of themes that seem to run through why this happened, or why we were doing this podcast and some of the thoughts we had, but it sounds better when you do it.
Thank you. You have great questions.
We hit all the big ones that I want. Any great stories or coming up stories maybe that you think are, again, that sort of the young academics of PA should hear so that they can learn from your experience?
I guess when one sort of eye-opening experience for me was when I started to talk with people who preceded me in the field. So early on, I ended up sitting next to John Rohr, who's now deceased. at a conference. And I was like, oh my God, this is John Rohr. And I have to critique his research. But when I got to know him and hear his story, and I've learned this from Jim Perry and others, is that I don't think there's anybody who's been kind of handed a career on a silver platter or a way forward. And if you really start talking to people, you hear about bumps in the road, you hear about times they got punched in the gut, or research that didn't work out, times that they couldn't get their work in a journal. The lesson for me, I think, is perseverance. And if there's and to listen to the critics and to take it in with earnestness. And yet, if there's somebody who's in your way, go around them. Go around them. And if you're pretty convinced that your path forward is the right one for you in your research, then do it. Still remaining open to any criticisms, but there's no one who has had the perfect career there's no one untouched. And we all get rejections, and we all get people who don't understand our research. And I would say just keep forward, keep your chin up, and keep going.
You don't have to answer this if you don't want to, and I can absolutely cut this out. But I would say for a lot of people, you're probably kind of like John Rohr was for you, where you've had this amazing career, and it's a little bit intimidating for a lot of people. You know, hearing you say that you've had experiences like everybody else has had, that at some point something hasn't worked out. Is there any particular instance in which, not that you failed a class, but something that you've done hasn't gone right, that's kind of been a memorable point in your life? If you're willing to kind of talk about what that is, as well as how you overcame facing that roadblock.
Yeah, sure.
Sorry, I know it's a heavy question, but
yeah, no, that's a good one. I'll start with the easy one, which is professional, and then I'll go to the personal part of it. The professional part of it is my first article sent to public administration review based on my award-winning dissertation was rejected. And the reviewers just didn't get it. And I was devastated. And I thought, oh my God, there is no place for me in this field. Similarly, my first application to present a paper at the ASPA conference was rejected. And I thought, oh my God, there's no place for me. And I remember going anyway to the ASPA conference just so I could learn about it, and sitting on a bus next to a scholar to go to some event at the conference and saying they wouldn't accept my paper. And I remember her advice was, well, then, keep going, just keep resubmitting and listen to the critics, make the changes that are needed. And, you've got this. And I think it happens way more than people understand. And it's okay. It's just part of the process. On the personal side, so when I was at Syracuse, I met my husband there. He was never my professor. We met playing volleyball, but he was a professor, and we ended up getting married. But I had already moved to Indiana University and started my career there while he was at Syracuse. Then we ended up getting married, and the dean at Syracuse called me up and said, would you be interested in an adjunct or a lecturer position? And I said, well, I have a pretty good tenure track position here at Indiana University. What would be the odds of me getting a tenure track position there? And he said to me, and remember, this was 30 years ago, but it's still shocking. He said, I guess I should emphasize to you that our principal interest in you at this moment is to keep Larry, my husband, happy. And I said, okay, I'll get back to you. Click. Picked up the phone, called my then fiance, and was like, there is no blank way I'm ever going to step foot on that campus again. You can take this engagement ring and blank it. And it was pretty upsetting. And that was kind of a punch in the gut. But then the next year, a woman associate dean from Maxwell called me up and said, I heard what happened. That guy's an idiot. What would it take to get you here? And so, and the only reason I wanted to go back was because I had a stepson there who was 13 who needed his father. So that sort of there's the personal part of it that intertwines. It's not all professional. And that personal part can slow your progress with your career. It can enhance work-life balance too. But I think more people have had experiences in that area than we know. And for me, it was like, I'm going around the bastard. I'm going around him. I'm not going to let this turkey keep me down. So, and again, that's probably my ornery personality coming out.
No, I mean, I think it's excellent advice. And I think you're right. There are so many people in this career who have to make choices that are not usually aligned with what would be best for their personal life and are sort of blind professional pursuit. Work-life balance is something we ask about. Do you think that your choices have helped you to have that? Have there been choices throughout your career where one has certainly taken precedent over the other?
Yeah. So I got to know Eleanor Ostrom a little bit at Indiana University. And our families ended up being friends. We'd go out to dinner with Eleanor and Vince. And I remember her saying, there's a time to lead and there's a time to follow. And I really think that's true in one's career, that in terms of work-life balance, there's a time when it might be right for you to be out in front as director or provost or whatever. And then there are times when it's just like, no, I'll be the best follower in the world. I'll implement this small thing for my department or my school because I have so much going on in my personal life right now. I just can't be the leader. So I think that's important. Two things for me, that I go to the gym every day. And
really,
I do. I have to.
I'm so impressed right now.
You'd think I'd be buff. I'm not, but I'm a swimmer. I love to swim, and I do it for my head. I do it for balance. And that has made me a kinder, gentler person. And I'll also say, and I know that having family is not for everyone, and I totally respect everybody's right to make that decision for themselves. But for me, when raising my stepson, but then also having a child of my own, put everything in perspective. And it didn't, rather than hindering my research, it just put it in perspective. So when I would get a rejection, but I had a 2-year-old at home, it was like, okay, the most important issue right now is, as I'm sitting on the floor with my 2-year-old, do I pick the red Lego or the green Lego? And it just, for me, put everything in perspective. And I know that's not everybody's story, but that was really helpful to me in terms of work-life balance.
No, that's fascinating to hear. I think it's definitely something that almost everybody struggles with. And when we were talking with Jim Perry, one of the things he came back with was that he's now admitting that he did a pretty bad job of the work-life balance. His daughters are full grown, but in trying to build that relationship back up, trying to have a stronger relationship with the grandkids, because he's now realizing how important the balance was, and he never really got there.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, Jim Perry's daughter was one of my babysitters. Yeah, I agree. And, Jim and my husband are of this era where they were just gone a lot for their careers. And I've always kept up going to conferences and the research and all that, but never hesitated. And my daughter's now 24, and she was talking about this with me the other day, that there's a time to lead and there's a time to follow. And if it's the time to really give attention to your family, then you give attention to your family. And most people, if they're human beings, will understand that you have to make those choices.
Right.
Hi, I'm back. I was so excited and impressed by your working out every day that I kicked my computer and shut it off. I am so sorry. I am going to keep my feet to myself. Oh, my goodness. Oh, and I needed all that work-life balance info too, but I guess I'll have to listen.
Since we are kind of coming towards the end, thinking about how your career has gone, thinking about people who are just starting their careers or are perhaps early in their career, what advice would you have for them in terms of how to actually achieve that balance, how to figure out what they're going to do, what comes next? Basically, what would you tell somebody?
You know, the thing that I'm probably most grateful for in my career has to do with the friends I've made, mainly as I've collaborated with people on research. And one little factoid that most people don't know is every research project I have filed on my computer is filed under a person. So it would be like the Lisa article or the Tom article. It's not the Impact of Courts article. And I think for me, I'm such a people person that being able to make friends, like real friends in the field with whom I can share my disappointments and my sorrows and my successes is something I'm just so grateful for. And I think if you can reach out to other people who are similarly situated, if you're a new scholar and you're going through tenure, there are dozens, if not hundreds of other people in the same boat in the field. Reach out to them and commiserate, even if it's just going out for a beer and complaining for an hour. Do it, because working in isolation can just be mind-numbing and so bad for your mental health. So I would say my advice would be reach out to people. Most people will be 100% open to your offerings of, let's go get a beer, or let's have breakfast together. And you'll end up at the end of your career with dozens of friends in the field who are really and truly lifetime friends.
That is so wonderful. And I know I want to be my own person, so I'm not going to pretend that's how I file my information under people, but it definitely says a lot about who you are and what this work means to you, that it is truly about people. And I think that's very cool.
I do have one last question before I stop saying stuff. You majored in English in undergrad.
Yes.
I have to ask, between going from English to law to PA kind of seems like a little bit of a jump. I get the law to PA.
That's why that writing's so good.
Here's the truth. I was accepted to the University of Kansas. And by the way, this was the only choice my family gave me. I was accepted into physical therapy program, and in which at that time was housed in the art school, because I did art as a high schooler. And my father pulled me over and said, "You need a liberal arts education. This is way too narrow. You shouldn't be declaring anything right now. Get into liberal arts." So I did, and within 4 years, I had the major of the week. So I was at one time a political science major. I was an English major. I was an anthropology major. I was convinced that I was going to be I would be out with the apes, in Africa, studying apes in the wild. I went through every.
You can still do it.
Yes, there's still time. And then in the end, I got an email from an advisor who said, "You haven't declared a major, and if you want to get out of here on time, you need to declare something." And so we added up the credits, and I had the most credits in English literature, so that's what I went with.
Do you think that was a good call on the part of the counselor? Like, should you have made that decision and been done and moved on to the next thing and gone to law school, and then, or no, our advisor should just let everybody go and find it in their own time?
I would say it was just a different era. I can't say that I ever got any advice from, I was also pre-med, and I had enough for a minor in biology, enough credits. So it's just a different era. When my daughter went to college, she had, I think, 5 advisors. And I didn't get any advice. To me, it was one huge smorgasbord of interesting courses, and I would just choose the one that looked the most interesting to me. So yes, I don't think that advisor was very helpful to me. And fortunately, I think the field of advising has advanced to the point where that probably doesn't happen that much anymore, I hope.
I think it's kind of interesting because I kind of half expected, as someone who's really prolific, that's coming partially out of the English background, but it's almost that was circumstantial and happenstance than anything else.
Yes, I do love to write. And I know I have friends who hate to write, hate it. But for me, it's very healthy exercise. And I'm not, where David Rosenblum once told me that he writes one page and it's done. For me, I'll write one page and then I'll revise it 10 times. So it's not as if I'm a genius at writing, but I really enjoy the process.
Oh, that's another good tip for anybody listening. Thank you. We need that. Okay. This has been an unbelievably wonderful conversation. Thank you so much, Dr. O'Leary, for joining us. I appreciate everything that you've said and how you have changed and added to this conversation. And I hope we can have you back.
Yeah, thanks for joining us.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, Josie and Bruce. This is really an important thing you're doing, and I am so grateful to have participated in it. So thank you very, very much.
Well, thank you.